The rim of my champagne glass caught the chandelier's light the moment my son said, "I always hated my mother." Still, I didn't blink, just circled the stem like I was pricing every word. As the room chuckled, I counted the chairs I paid for, the suit he wore, the silence he bet on. While he toasted his bride and, starting his own family, I felt the lie tighten like a string. The same glass chilled in my hand as I realized he thought inheritance was immunity. That's when I stood and let the groom see who paid for the floor beneath his pride. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The chandeliers above the ballroom shimmered like 1,000 watching eyes, every crystal catching and scattering the light. Joanne Whitaker sat near the front, posture perfect, her silver gown sharp against the muted gold of the linen. Her champagne flute was half full, the bubbles lazy. She smiled the kind of smile that didn't invite conversation, composed, serene, practiced. On stage, her son adjusted the microphone. Grant looked immaculate, tailored tux, steady grin, a confidence that bordered on arrogance. His bride, Aubrey, squeezed his hand before drifting back to her seat. "Wow," he began, his voice carrying through the hushed room. "You spend months planning the perfect day, and somehow, it still hits harder than you think it will." Polite laughter. Glasses clinked. Joanne's fingers tapped the stem of her flute. One, two. Pause. Grant turned slightly, scanning the crowd. "I've always had to make it on my own," he said. His tone softened as though he were admitting a great truth. "Everything I've achieved, I've built from scratch." Joanne's lashes lowered a fraction. She didn't move otherwise. A ripple of murmurs moved through the room. Guests exchanged polite glances, unsure if this was humility or performance. Grant chuckled lightly. "Especially with a mother like mine." It landed like a slap wrapped in a joke. Laughter, nervous, scattered, fluttered across the tables. A few guests looked at Joanne, then quickly away. Aubrey smiled too wide, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Joanne blinked once, slow and deliberate. Then she lifted her champagne and took a sip, her reflection fractured in the golden bubbles. Her best friend Ruth Delgado leaned in from the next chair, voice a low rasp beneath the music. "You want me to say something?" Joanne's lips barely moved. "No." Grant was still talking. "Don't get me wrong," he said, waving his glass as if punctuating an invisible sentence. "My mom's strong-willed. Let's call it that. She taught me how to stand on my own 2 feet, usually by kicking the ground out first." The crowd laughed again, this time with less confusion. He'd found his rhythm. Joanne's smile didn't falter. She listened as though attending a lecture she'd already mastered. Her mind, however, was far from the laughter. She noted every word, every phrasing. She could feel Ruth's gaze flicking toward her, testing her reaction. From somewhere behind them, the photographer's camera clicked. 3 sharp snaps that felt intrusive. Joanne set her flute down gently, aligning it perfectly with her plate's edge. Her breathing stayed even. Grant's voice took on a sentimental edge. "But hey, it worked out, right? Here we are. I found the woman of my dreams, and I guess—" He paused for effect. "I finally get to start my own family." That last word hung in the air like perfume that wouldn't fade. Joanne's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the tablecloth. Ruth's jaw flexed. Aubrey dabbed at the corner of her eye, a well-rehearsed gesture that made the guests sigh softly. Cameras flashed. The DJ smiled as if he'd just witnessed a perfect movie moment. But Joanne heard the subtext clearer than anyone. "I finally get to start my own family," meaning, you were never enough. She studied her son as if he were a stranger who happened to look like someone she used to love, the boy she'd raised on her own after his father left. the one who'd gone to private schools, worn suits she'd paid for, driven cars titled in her name. He was thanking the universe for his independence while standing on the foundation she'd built. When the applause started, she joined in, slow and steady, a measured rhythm that didn't quite match the others. Grant lifted his glass toward the crowd, then toward her. "To family," he said. Joanne lifted her glass in return. Her smile was razor thin. "To truth," she murmured, too quietly for anyone but Ruth to hear. Ruth's hand brushed hers under the table, a silent question. "Are you okay?" Joanne didn't answer. Her gaze stayed fixed on her son, who was basking in the spotlight he'd created. When the laughter faded and the music swelled again, Joanne exhaled slowly, eyes cooling. She reached for her napkin, folded it once, then set it down. Ruth whispered again, half joking this time. Seriously. "You want me to say something?" Joanne's reply came in a whisper that felt like a warning to the universe. "Not yet." The champagne glass caught the light as she lifted it once more, her reflection rippling in the pale gold. In her silence, something shifted. A decision forming. Quiet, but immovable. Across the room, Grant laughed, oblivious. And somewhere inside that laughter, Joanne heard the end of something, and the beginning of her next move. For a long second, the ballroom hummed with post-toast chatter. Forks clinking, shoes scraping, laughter folding back into the music. But at table 3, the air turned to glass. Joanne Whitaker sat perfectly still, the cool glint of her champagne flute resting between her fingers. Ruth leaned closer, her whisper slicing through the noise. "Joe." He's still smirking. Joanne's eyes stayed locked on her son. His tuxedo gleamed under the lights, his arm draped casually around Aubrey's shoulders. He looked like a man who thought he'd won. Then, without warning, Joanne stood. No scrape of chair. No announcement. Just motion, clean and deliberate. The people nearest her froze mid-sentence. Across the room, a few heads turned, sensing the shift before it had a name. The DJ lowered the music slightly, confused. The servers paused in their routes, silver trays trembling faintly in midair. Joanne set her glass down on the tablecloth, not hard, but final. Her voice carried with unsettling calm. "Let's tell the truth, since we're all here." The sound wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It was the kind of tone that commanded attention simply because it didn't ask for it. Whispers rippled outward like dropped ink spreading through water. Aubrey's parents stiffened. Grant's hand fell from his wife's shoulder, his face blanching, then flushing red. From near the cake table, Callie Green, the wedding coordinator, nearly dropped her clipboard. "Mrs. Whitaker," she whispered, rushing forward in elegant panic. "Do you want to step outside for a moment? Maybe we can—" Joanne turned her head slowly and Callie stopped mid-sentence. The older woman's eyes were steady, not angry. Worse. They were precise. "I'll stay just long enough," Joanne said softly. Grant pushed back his chair, the legs screeching against marble. "Mom, what are you doing?" She didn't answer him. She only reached for her champagne glass again and tapped its rim gently with a spoon. Chink. 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 The room obeyed. Silence rolled in, heavy and complete. Even the band stopped mid-note. Every face turned toward her. The donors, the colleagues, the old friends who'd watched her claw her way to the top of Dallas's real estate circuit. They'd all seen her command a boardroom. None had seen her command a wedding. Joanne scanned the room slowly, as if she were taking inventory of the witnesses. Her expression remained soft, but her poise carved through the tension like a blade through silk. "When my son says he built his life on his own," she began, "that isn't entirely true." Grant rose halfway, his voice cracking through the air. "Mom, don't—" "Sit down," she said, not raising her tone, not even looking at him. The authority in her voice did the work for her. He froze. Ruth exhaled, barely audible, her hand hovering near her drink. She knew that sound, Joanne's composure before impact. Across the room, a whisper from someone near the bar. "Oh my God, is this happening?" Callie's eyes darted toward the exit again, calculating escape routes that would never be used. Joanne continued, her tone calm enough to sound rehearsed. But it wasn't. "We're celebrating love tonight, aren't we? Promises, commitments, gratitude." She smiled faintly. "Seems fair to start with honesty." Her words slid into the silence like a pianist testing the keys. Grant's jaw clenched. "You're embarrassing yourself." "No," Joanne said simply. "I'm reminding you of who made this night possible." A small tremor of murmurs spread again. Curiosity, disbelief, the sweet electricity of scandal. Aubrey reached for Grant's arm. "Please, just—" Joanne's gaze flicked toward her, polite but cutting. "You'll want to hear this too, dear." The bride's mouth shut. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Ruth, because she couldn't help herself, gave the faintest smirk. The corners of Joanne's lips twitched, not in amusement, but in recognition. The moment had arrived. The line between humiliation and truth had been crossed, and Joanne was choosing which side to stand on. She lifted her glass again, the bubbles now flat, and looked directly at her son. "You said you made it on your own," she murmured, her voice lowering into something dangerous and calm. "Let's start with what that really means." The air snapped. Guests leaned forward as if pulled by gravity. Grant's face paled, his confidence draining as quickly as the laughter had earlier. Somewhere near the back, the photographer hesitated. Lens raised but shaking, unsure if this was a moment to capture or to fear. Ruth whispered, "Oh, hell," under her breath. Joanne smiled at the room, small, deliberate, final. "We'll make this brief," she said. "I promise." And with that, she took a slow sip from her glass, her eyes still locked on her son. The band hadn't moved. The servers hadn't breathed. Dallas high society hung in the balance, waiting for her next sentence. For a breathless moment, no one moved. The only sound in the entire ballroom was the faint hiss of champagne losing its sparkle. Joanne stood steady at the center of her table, the silver beading of her gown catching the light like small shards of resolve. Grant's forced grin wavered, then disappeared altogether. "Mom, you're making a scene," he muttered, low enough for only the first row of tables to hear. Joanne's reply was silk wrapped around steel. "A scene?" Her eyes found his. "No, Grant, I'm setting a record straight." She didn't shout, didn't raise her tone. The calm precision in her voice was more cutting than volume could ever be. She lifted her glass slightly, as if proposing another toast. "Let's talk about what it actually takes to build a wedding like this." Ruth leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, a knowing spark behind her expression. She'd seen this side of Joanne before. Rare, lethal, beautiful. "The venue," Joanne began, her gaze sweeping toward the ornate chandeliers and the crystal-draped stage. 200 guests, open bar, prime date in April, $57,000. A hush deepened. Guests glanced at one another, unsure whether to be horrified or fascinated. "The dress," she continued. "Custom Vera Wang. Paid in full before it ever left the showroom. $12,000. Aubrey's head jerked slightly toward Grant, color draining from her cheeks. Her parents, Richard and Diane Carson, shifted in their seats, faces tightening into polite masks. Joanne didn't look at them, not yet. "Catering," she said. 3 courses, premium spirits, gold tier service, $64,000. Grant exhaled sharply through his nose, trying to cut her off. "Mom, enough. This isn't—" She held up a single hand. palm outward. The motion silenced him. "And the ring," she said softly, eyes cutting toward Aubrey's trembling hand on the table. "I imagine it sparkles more than it should for a man who claims to have made it on his own." A few audible gasps broke the quiet. Someone at the back whispered, "She wouldn't," but she would. Joanne looked back at her son. "You made speeches. I made payments." Every syllable landed with the weight of a gavel. Callie, the wedding planner, stood near the back, her clipboard pressed tight to her chest. The expression on her face was a mixture of awe and terror. Grant's voice cracked. "You're humiliating me." Joanne tilted her head slightly. "You did that part yourself." For the first time all evening, Ruth let out a short, delighted laugh. The sound cut through the tension like the pop of a cork. "You don't have to love me, Grant," Joanne said, her tone soft but deliberate. "But you'll respect my name when the lights come on." The phrase hung heavy in the air, echoing off the high ceilings. Aubrey's mother fidgeted with her pearls, eyes darting toward the exits. Her father cleared his throat. "Joanne, maybe we should—" She turned her gaze on him, calm as a surgeon's hand. "You should know, Richard, that when your daughter insisted on that flower wall—" She gestured to the cascading roses that filled the ballroom's rear arch. "The invoice came to 17,000. You said you'd reimburse half. You never did." The man's jaw slackened. Ruth's smirk deepened. "Guess that's what we call a paper trail," she murmured, just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Across the room, Ben Crowley, Joanne's financial advisor, quietly stood. He adjusted his jacket, gave her a small nod she didn't return, and slipped out a side door. He already knew what that nod meant. She was done funding illusions. Joanne finally looked back at her son. Her expression softened. Not tenderly, but in the way someone closes a book they've finally finished reading. "I built this day," she said, her voice steady. "Every petal, every thread, every song. I did it because I believed my son deserved the world." Grant swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the crowd that now watched him with naked discomfort. Joanne leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a murmur that carried perfectly through the still air. "You wanted to prove you didn't need me. Congratulations. As of tonight, you don't." The words hit like a thunderclap, though she'd spoken them like a prayer. The crowd sat frozen, caught between sympathy and shock. Aubrey's eyes glistened, mascara trembling. Ruth's lips pressed together, half smile, half grimace. Joanne exhaled once, slow and clean, and set her glass back on the table. The sound of it meeting crystal was sharp enough to end a conversation. She gave one final glance around the silent room. "Now," she said, almost gently, "we can all finish dinner in peace." And with that, she turned and walked away from the table, her heels clicking in time with the stunned heartbeat of the room. At the back, the door closed behind Ben Crowley, already on his phone, already making calls. The ballroom noise stayed behind her like static, a chorus of whispers and clinking silverware fading beneath the hush of the hallway. Joanne walked with measured grace, each step unhurried, deliberate. The door at the end of the corridor stood ajar, light spilling across the carpet in a neat rectangle. Inside waited Ben Crowley. He'd anticipated her. Of course he had. The man never missed a signal. His tie was loosened, but his composure flawless. A legal pad already open on the table beside two untouched glasses of water. He didn't greet her with pleasantries. "You want to do this now?" Joanne closed the door behind her. "I want it done before dessert is served." Ruth slipped in behind her, heels soft on the carpet. "Told you she'd mean it," she muttered, crossing her arms. Ben straightened, pen poised. "All right. What are we cutting?" "The trust," Joanne said. Her tone was flat, transactional. "Immediately." Ben blinked once, confirming she wasn't speaking in metaphor. The Whitaker Trust? That's his lifetime account. It funds his business ventures, housing, everything tied to his name. Joanne took a seat at the table, folding her hands. Then it's about time he learns what his name costs. Ruth moved to the sideboard, poured herself a splash of water, and said to Ben, "You'd better move fast. He's probably out there trying to spin a sob story already." Ben hesitated. "Do you want to freeze just the liquid assets or the investment portfolios too?" "Everything." The word sliced the air clean. Ben gave a slow nod. He scribbled notes, methodical, precise. "Understood. That includes pre-wedding transfers, the housing stipend, and the marital account you opened last month?" "Yes," Joanne replied. "All of it. Every cent that carries my signature." From the corner, Ruth added dryly, "Pull the cars too. Both of them. I registered those under your LLC when we bought them, remember?" Joanne gave her a brief, appreciative glance. "Good catch." Ruth smirked. "He's not going to enjoy his honeymoon Uber rides." Ben adjusted his glasses, his tone cautious but professional. "You realize this will cause a ripple. His credit lines are underwritten through your name. If I initiate the closure tonight, he'll lose access to everything by morning." "That's the point," Joanne said. Silence followed. Quiet, heavy, definitive. Outside the frosted glass door, faint laughter drifted from the ballroom. The sound felt foreign now, like a party from another lifetime. Ben leaned forward slightly. "This will make headlines if he goes public. People will ask why." Joanne met his gaze. "Then they'll hear the truth. A mother funding her son's arrogance isn't charity. It's malpractice." Ruth let out a low whistle. "That's going on a coffee mug." A knock interrupted them. Sharp, hurried. The door opened a crack, revealing Richard Carson, Aubrey's father. His complexion was ruddy, his composure cracking at the edges. "Joanne," he said, half breathless, "may I have a word?" Ben looked to her for direction. Joanne motioned slightly with her hand. "Let him in." Richard stepped inside, closing the door behind him like a man entering a negotiation he was doomed to lose. "Listen," he started, forcing a thin smile. "I think emotions are running high. Weddings are charged environments. Why don't we all take a breath?" Joanne's expression didn't waver. "I'm breathing just fine." He shifted uncomfortably. "You embarrassed Grant. You embarrassed all of us, frankly. But let's be reasonable. There's no need to destroy the boy's future over a toast." Ruth chuckled under her breath. "That was more than a toast." Joanne turned her chair slightly toward him. "Richard, your daughter married a man who publicly diminished the woman who made his life possible. That isn't youthful pride. That's character rot." Richard's jaw tightened. "You're making it personal." "It is personal," Joanne said softly. "It always was." Ben cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Mrs. Whitaker, if I may, once I initiate these cancellations, the holdings will revert to your control. That means the Highland Park property, the investment accounts, the vehicles, everything." "Perfect," she said, standing. "I want confirmation in writing by sunrise." Richard's composure cracked. "You'll ruin him." "No," Joanne replied, smoothing her dress. "He ruined himself the moment he confused dependence with entitlement." Ruth glanced at her watch. "I'll alert the insurance carrier to pull the premiums too. That'll make things educational." Joanne gave a faint nod of approval. "Do it." Ben gathered his papers. "Consider it done." He hesitated for a moment longer, then asked quietly, "And the pre-wedding gift accounts?" "Those were technically joint." Joanne met his gaze. "Close them. If she wants to keep her diamond, she can learn what it's like to pay for it." A brief silence settled, a pause before the next domino fell. Then Joanne exhaled slowly, as though releasing years of tolerance all at once. Ruth placed a hand on her shoulder. "Not in comfort." but in solidarity. You good? Joanne nodded once. Better than I've been in years. From the hallway came the muffled sound of laughter again, distant, disconnected. Ben gathered his files and moved toward the door. I'll take care of everything. You'll have reports within the hour. Thank you, Joanne said. When he left, Richard lingered in the doorway, still searching her face for mercy. You really mean to go through with this, don't you? Joanne's reply was quiet, almost tender. You were right about one thing, Richard. Weddings are charged environments. She brushed past him, her heels clicking down the hall. I just decided who's paying for the voltage. Dallas glittered past midnight. Inside the country club ballroom, the party limped on, running on habit more than joy. The champagne had gone flat, the music dulled. Grant and Aubrey posed stiffly for the last photos, smiles carved from exhaustion and disbelief. But the real story was already unfolding elsewhere. Quietly, surgically. Ben Crowley sat in his office across town, the blue glow of his computer reflecting off his glasses. The cursor blinked over the command prompt on his financial dashboard. With a single keystroke, he entered the code Joanne had authorized. Access revoked. Every joint account, every pre-wedding transfer, every corporate card tied to the Whitaker name. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. A single confirmation ping appeared. Then another. Then a third. One by one. The digital arteries of Grant Whitaker's life sealed shut. At that exact moment, 20 miles away, Grant's phone buzzed with the first tremor of his downfall. He was standing by the bar, jacket open, tie loosened, trying to laugh off the lingering tension. She'll cool off, he told his groomsmen. She always does. Then the phone in his pocket vibrated again. Then again, harder this time. Mr. Whitaker? A clipped voice asked when he answered. This is John from Parkview Motors. We're calling regarding your two vehicles. Our records indicate a transfer of ownership. Your name is no longer listed on either title. Grant frowned, his voice rising. That's a mistake, my attorney. Sir, the man interrupted, polite but firm. Our attorney is Ben Crowley. He's copied on the paperwork. Grant froze. The line went silent except for the low hum of music behind him. He hung up, his pulse quickening. He opened his banking app. The loading icon spun, and then a red message appeared. Access denied. Aubrey's voice reached him from behind. What's wrong? He turned toward her, pale. Our accounts. It says locked. It's some kind of glitch. But Aubrey was already checking her own phone, her brow furrowed. My card was just declined. At the jewelry house. They were supposed to finish the resizing before we left for St. Lucia. Grant's mouth went dry. The ring? The ring, Grant, she snapped. The six-figure ring your mother paid for. She stopped mid-sentence, realizing too late what she'd said aloud. People nearby turned, curiosity gleaming like candlelight. Across the city, Joanne sat at her vanity, the evening gown replaced by silk pajamas. A half-finished glass of scotch rested beside her. Her phone buzzed once. Ben's name. All accounts closed, vehicles transferred, liquidity zeroed out. She read it, smiled faintly, and replied with a single word. Confirmed. From the other side of the room, Ruth entered holding 2 cups of tea. Thought you'd still be up, she said. Joanne gestured to the phone. It's done. Ruth sank into a chair, crossing her legs. They thought they were grown. She gave a soft snort. Let them budget. Joanne swirled her drink, the ice melting slow and steady. His new life begins now, with nothing I built. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them humming with quiet satisfaction. Then Joanne's landline rang, an old-fashioned sound against the stillness. She let it ring twice before answering. Whitaker residence. A nervous male voice came through. "Mrs. Whitaker, this is Brent from the catering service. I'm so sorry to bother you, but the final payment authorization, well, it's been declined under the Whitaker event account. Should I bill it directly to you?" Joanne smiled. "You already have my authorization file. Send the invoice to my office. I'll settle it tomorrow." When she hung up, Ruth grinned. "Guess they're realizing who the adult in the room is." Joanne leaned back, her reflection framed in the vanity mirror, composed, remote, radiant. "Respect is a funny currency," she said. "They spent all of it before the honeymoon even started." Meanwhile, across town, panic bloomed. Aubrey's parents were huddled with their daughter at the hotel front desk, arguing with the night manager about declined cards. Grant stood off to the side, phone to his ear, listening to one automated rejection after another. His chest tightened with every polite robotic voice telling him the same thing. "We're sorry. Your access cannot be verified." Aubrey's voice broke through his spiral. "Grant, tell me you can fix this. Tell me this isn't real." But he couldn't answer. In his pocket, the phone buzzed one last time, an email from his financial institution confirming trust account terminated at originator's request. His vision blurred. His jaw clenched so tight it ached. He looked up, and for the first time that night, he understood. This wasn't a tantrum. It was precision warfare. He caught a glimpse of himself reflected in the hotel window. Expensive tuxedo, undone tie, eyes hollow. The son of Joanne Whitaker no longer existed. Back at Joanne's home, Ruth stood to leave. "You're not going to sleep, are you?" Joanne smiled faintly, finishing her scotch. "I don't need to. Tomorrow will be quiet." She rose, drew the curtains, and turned off the lamp. The last thing she heard was the faint vibration of her phone, another message from Ben. "All done. He has nothing left." Joanne set the phone face down and whispered into the darkness. "Good." The morning after the wedding broke cool and gray, clouds hanging low over Dallas like unspoken judgment. Joanne sat in her breakfast nook, the smell of coffee rising from the French press beside her. The newspaper lay untouched. She didn't need to read about the world. She had remade her own. Her phone buzzed across the counter, one long vibration. She didn't need to check who it was. The rhythm of the message already told her. "Grant, you're bitter. And alone." She read it twice, the way you might re-examine a smudge on glass. More irritation than emotion. For a moment she just watched the message glow on the screen, reflected faintly in the stainless steel of her refrigerator. Then she typed one word back. "Joanne. Correct. No punctuation, no flourish. Just the truth. Polished and final." She pressed send, set the phone down, and went back to stirring her coffee. Across town, Grant watched the message deliver. The tiny read indicator appeared. No follow-up, no explanation, no apology. Just that single, unflinching word. Aubrey was pacing their hotel suite, her designer robe hanging open, hair still pinned from the night before. "She cut us off, Grant. Do you even understand what that means? My cards don't work, the bank won't talk to me, and the honeymoon suite." He slammed his hand on the counter. "Stop saying she, I'll fix it." Aubrey stopped pacing. "With what money?" Her question hung in the air, cruel in its simplicity. Grant looked toward the window where the skyline shimmered, cruelly indifferent. He picked up his phone again, typing furiously, half apology, half accusation, but Joanne had already muted him. His messages stacked, green bubbles in an empty thread, unanswered and unread. Back at the Whitaker house, Ruth arrived unannounced, letting herself in as always. She carried a box of lemon pastries and a grin that said she'd been waiting for this visit. "Morning, Empress of Dallas," she said. "How's the kingdom holding?" Joanne smiled faintly. "The revolutionaries have been subdued." Ruth slid into the chair opposite her, pouring coffee into her own cup without asking. "Let me guess," he texted. "One word," Joanne replied. "Let me guess again. Something unoriginal." Joanne slid the phone across the table. Ruth read the message, snorted, and set it face down. Boys and their tantrums. You'd think cutting them off financially would also cut them off emotionally. Before Joanne could respond, her email notification pinged. She glanced down. The subject line was both predictable and absurd. From Diane Carson. Subject: regarding last night's misunderstanding. Joanne clicked it open. The message dripped with politeness so forced it almost squeaked. "Dear Joanne, I wanted to reach out before any lasting hard feelings set in. Weddings can bring out heightened emotions, and while we all recognize your disappointment, I'm sure you can appreciate how challenging this has been for our family. Perhaps in time, everyone can move past the ugliness of last night. It would be such a shame for the community to remember the event for drama instead of celebration." Warmly, Joanne chuckled under her breath and passed the phone to Ruth. Ruth's expression shifted from amusement to mock outrage. Oh, she did not just use the phrase heightened emotions. She did. "Give me 5 minutes." Ruth cracked her knuckles, opened Joanne's laptop, and began to type, her lipstick leaving faint marks on the coffee cup beside her. "Dear Diane, thank you for your concern. Please inform your daughter and son-in-law that the honeymoon suite balance remains outstanding. It's due by Friday. Warm regards, Ruth Delgado, on behalf of Joanne Whitaker." She hit send before Joanne could comment. Joanne raised an eyebrow. "That was diplomatic." "Darling, if I wanted to be diplomatic, I'd have attached an invoice." The two women exchanged a rare, quiet laugh, the sound of shared satisfaction, not cruelty. Across town, the consequences unfolded in real time. Aubrey's mother read the email aloud in disbelief, while Richard muttered something about "damn women with too much money." Aubrey, humiliated, sat frozen on the edge of the hotel bed. Grant stood near the window, phone in hand, scrolling through every contact he thought might still pick up. None did. Every number was tied to his mother's network. Every favor he'd ever pulled, every investment, every friendship had her fingerprints somewhere on the foundation. Without her, he was a name with no currency. He dropped into a chair, elbows on knees, voice low. "She's actually doing it. She's erasing me." Aubrey didn't answer. Her silence was worse than anger. Back in Highland Park, Joanne finished her coffee, pushed the cup aside, and reached for her phone one last time. She opened the thread of unread messages from Grant and Aubrey, 30 of them now, alternating between apologies, threats, and demands. She scrolled to the bottom, paused for a beat, and pressed block contact. Ruth watched, approving. "How's it feel?" Joanne leaned back, a serene calm settling over her. Like the static finally stopped. The phone buzzed again. An unknown number this time. Joanne let it ring out. Ruth smirked. "You gonna check who it is?" Joanne stood, gathering their empty cups. "No need," she said softly. "If it's important, they'll find a way. If it's them, they'll learn silence." By Monday morning, the story had gone quiet, but only on the surface. Beneath it, things were unraveling in silence, pixel by pixel. Joanne's office smelled faintly of lavender and printer toner. She sat behind her desk, the sunlight slanting across her notes, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes," she said calmly. "That clause should be in Section 9, under licensing. I hold the rights to all image use, public or digital." On the other end of the line, the photographer hesitated. "Mrs. Whitaker, it's unusual for a client to pull wedding distribution after an event." The couple, Joanne interrupted, "used my money and my name. My name stays attached until I say otherwise." A pause, then, understood. We'll stop edits immediately. Good, Joanne said. Send me the invoice for the time you've already billed. I'll pay in full by this afternoon. She hung up, took a slow sip of coffee, and smiled faintly to herself. Across from her, Ruth sat on the arm of the couch, flipping through a gossip magazine. They wanted a fairy tale, Ruth said without looking up. Got a footnote? Joanne's lips twitched in amusement. A footnote's generous. Mm-hmm. Ruth folded the magazine and tossed it aside. You know what's funny? They'll care more about those pictures than the actual marriage. Joanne tilted her head. You think? Oh, honey, Ruth said, standing. For people like them, the post is the point. Meanwhile, in a sleek apartment suite uptown, Grant was pacing again. The light from his laptop painted his face blue as he scrolled through his inbox, searching for the email thread from their photographer, Sable Studios. Every message he clicked brought the same response. This gallery is no longer available. Please contact the event administrator for access. Event administrator? He muttered. What the hell does that even mean? Aubrey was sitting at the vanity, mascara running, phone clutched like a lifeline. They said they're not sending proofs. They said your mother revoked usage rights. She can't do that, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. She did, Grant. Aubrey's voice cracked. All the photos are gone. The hashtags, the posts, even the ones my bridesmaids uploaded. They've all vanished. What kind of psycho calls Instagram? Grant rubbed his temples. She probably didn't. She probably just called the PR firm that owns half their servers. That realization made Aubrey cry harder. On the other side of town, the photographer's assistant quietly deleted folders, her mouse gliding over rows of perfect luminous images. The Arch of Roses, the first dance, the champagne tower. Click, delete, confirm. Every time, her heart raced a little faster. She'd been instructed by email not to retain backups. Client request. Binding clause. By noon, there wasn't a single edited shot left of the Whitaker-Carson wedding, not in storage, not in the cloud, not even on backup drives. Aubrey called her friends in tears. His mother ruined our wedding, she sobbed. Everything's gone. Every photo, every post, even the magazine spread. We were supposed to be in Texas Modern Bride next month. One of her friends murmured something vague about lawyers. Another texted Grant, half out of pity, half out of curiosity. None replied to Aubrey's group chat again. By evening, Grant tried rallying his old college buddies in a group text titled The Inner Circle. Grant, she's out of control. She's erasing us. Ben, not Crowley. Dude, what happened? Grant, she canceled the trust, froze everything. Now the photos are gone. Liam, wait, the wedding photos? Grant, all of them? Then nothing. The typing indicator flashed, then vanished. One by one, their replies stopped coming. Grant threw his phone across the couch. Aubrey glared at him from the corner, her voice raw. You think you can fix this? You think she'll give any of it back? Grant turned on her, eyes hollow. No, she doesn't give things back. She owns them. Back in Highland Park, Joanne was already 3 steps ahead. She stood by the window, arms folded, watching the city lights blink on in the distance. Behind her, Ruth poured 2 glasses of white wine. Any fallout yet? Ruth asked. Joanne's phone buzzed again, notifications from the event vendor portal. She scrolled lazily. Request for reauthorization, declined. Gallery suspended. Tag removals confirmed. She turned her phone face down. It's cleaner this way, she said. People remember what they see online. Now, there's nothing to remember. Ruth handed her a glass. Accept the story they'll whisper about you. Joanne smiled faintly. Good. Stories last longer than pictures. The 2 women clinked glasses gently. The sound rang soft and sharp, like a private toast to justice. Somewhere across Dallas, Grant opened his social media feed again, desperate. His name, his wedding, his mother, erased. The posts had simply vanished. Hashtags broken, mentions gone. He refreshed the screen. Nothing. He checked Aubrey's profile. It had been scrubbed too. Their wedding hashtag now led to an empty page, the error message cold and impersonal. This content is no longer available. Grant stared at the screen until it dimmed. He whispered, almost to himself, "She deleted our life." Sunday sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows of the Belmont Country Club, illuminating silver cutlery and blush tablecloths that matched the now infamous wedding. The post-wedding brunch banner hung from the balcony like an afterthought, bright, hopeful, and pitifully misplaced. Joanne Whitaker's name sat printed in gold script on the seating chart. Reserved, mother of the groom, her chair would stay empty. The guests whispered before the first mimosa had even been poured. She's not coming? After all that? Well, would you? At 10:42, Ruth Delgado arrived instead. She swept through the doorway in a tailored black dress, simple, elegant, deliberate. No pearls, no smile. Just the quiet authority of someone walking into a play she already knew the ending to. Heads turned, forks paused midair. Even the waitstaff hesitated. "Good morning," she said to the hostess. "Joanne sends her regrets. I'll be sitting in her place." The hostess blinked. "Oh, of course, Mrs. Delgado. May I take your coat?" Ruth handed it over without breaking eye contact. "Keep it close. I won't be long." The main table, the bride and groom's, was a battlefield dressed in floral arrangements. Aubrey sat stiffly beside Grant, both of them wearing the brittle smiles of people pretending to be fine. Her eyes were still swollen from the night before. Grant's tie was missing, his cufflinks mismatched. When Ruth approached, their smiles faltered. "Well," she said, sliding into Joanne's seat. "I thought someone should represent the family." Aubrey's voice cracked first. "Where's Joanne?" Ruth poured herself a mimosa. "Home, enjoying her peace. You might try it sometime." Aubrey blinked rapidly, her mascara trembling on the edge of collapse. "She couldn't even face us?" Ruth stirred her drink with the straw. "She faced you last night. This is just the echo." The table fell silent. Guests nearby pretended not to listen. But every head tilted a fraction closer. The only sound came from the soft jazz playing in the background, its cheerfulness mocking the tension. When the waiter arrived with menus, Ruth waved him off. "Don't bother, I brought my own contribution." From her black leather tote, she pulled a crisp white envelope and set it neatly in the center of the tablecloth. The embossed lettering read, "Final costs for your behavior." Grant's face drained of color. "What the hell is this?" Ruth smiled pleasantly. "An invoice. Joanne wanted to make sure the financial side of your little performance was fully reconciled." He didn't reach for it, so Ruth slid it toward him with one manicured finger. "Itemized, of course. Venue balance, canceled floral contract, photographer's termination fees. Oh, and the replacement PR retainer for damage control. Comes to $143,200 due by month's end." The sound that came out of Aubrey was half sob, half gasp. "You can't be serious." "I'm not," Ruth said smoothly. "Joanne is. I'm just punctual." A fork clattered somewhere down the table. One of Aubrey's bridesmaids whispered something behind her hand. The clinking of mimosas grew nervous and irregular. Ruth leaned back, calm amid the discomfort. "You know, this is actually the perfect venue for this kind of conversation. Brunch is for clarity. Daylight makes everything visible." Grant's jaw flexed. "Tell her this isn't over." Ruth's smile was slight, cutting. "Oh, sweetheart, it was over the second she stood up." The waiter returned, oblivious, refilling glasses. Aubrey reached for hers with a trembling hand but couldn't steady it. Orange liquid sloshed across her plate. Her mother rushed from another table, whispering frantic apologies that sounded more like excuses. Ruth didn't move. She folded her napkin with slow precision, her poise only heightening the chaos around her. Then the toast began. One of Grant's groomsmen, obviously assigned damage control, stood awkwardly, raising his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, his smile strained. "May love always win." Aubrey's tears broke mid-toast. They fell silently at first, then fully, shoulders shaking. The room went dead quiet again. Even the clinking stopped. Ruth didn't comfort her. She just watched. Detached, but not cruel. "Love's undefeated," she said softly, almost to herself. "But self-respect occasionally wins the rematch." Grant muttered under his breath, "You're enjoying this." Ruth turned to him, expression unreadable. "No, Grant. I'm documenting it." She stood, smoothed her dress, and placed a $20 bill beside her untouched glass. "For the server," she said. "It's not his fault brunch turned into a requiem." Then she picked up her bag, leaving the envelope where it sat. As she reached the door, the hostess called after her, voice tentative. "Should I tell Mrs. Whitaker anything?" Ruth didn't look back. "Tell her brunch went exactly as expected." She stepped outside into the bright Texas morning, sliding her sunglasses on as if sealing herself from the noise behind her. Rain slicked the glass facade of Crowley Financial the next morning, turning the downtown skyline into streaks of gray and gold. Joanne Whitaker didn't bother with an umbrella. She liked the feel of it. Cold, cleansing, absolute. Ben's assistant opened the door the instant she stepped off the elevator. "Mrs. Bastian Whitaker, he's ready for you." "Of course he is," Joanne murmured, brushing a droplet from her sleeve. Inside, Ben Crowley's office was exactly as she remembered, immaculate, deliberate, and expensive in a way that didn't show off. The walls were lined with framed certificates, the desk bare except for 2 folders, already waiting. "Morning, Joanne," Ben said, rising. He didn't offer his hand. She didn't need gestures. She needed results. "Morning," she replied. She set her purse down with surgical precision. "Let's get started." He gestured to the 2 folders. Left is the Whitaker Trust as it stands. Right is the restructure proposal I drafted overnight. Joanne sat. "Walk me through it." Ben adjusted his glasses, voice even. "Currently, Grant remains the sole beneficiary of the secondary portfolio, the Highland Park property, long-term investments, and the residual income from Whitaker Holdings. The restructure would dissolve his access and reroute those assets under a new protective trust. It will be irreversible once signed." "Good," Joanne said. "And Aubrey?" "She's listed as a secondary contingent through marital rights," Ben replied carefully. "I've prepared an amendment flagging her permanently, per your request. She won't qualify for any spousal claims now, or in the event of divorce." Joanne's expression didn't shift. "She'll find that educational." From the corner, Ruth spoke up. She'd arrived unannounced, carrying a paper cup of coffee that looked wildly out of place in Ben's Museum of Minimalism. "Don't just cut them off," she said. "Replace them." Joanne's eyes met hers, curious. "Replace them?" Ruth sipped, unbothered. "You've been mentoring that girl. What's her name? The one from the foundation?" "Elena," Joanne said softly. "Ruth's niece." Ben looked up from his papers. "The law student from UNT? The one you funded through grad school?" Joanne nodded once. "Yes. She's competent. Decent. Grateful." Ruth smiled faintly. "Qualities our dear Grant has never found fashionable." Ben cleared his throat. "You'd like to make her the new beneficiary?" "I'd like to make her the new legacy," Joanne corrected. "The trust will continue, just not through blood. I'm done rewarding inheritance over merit. He didn't argue. He simply adjusted his pen and began to write. The scratching sound filled the room like rainfall against glass. Ruth wandered to the window, staring down at the soaked city. You know, she said, it's poetic. You're not just erasing his access. You're erasing the illusion he ever earned it. Joanne leaned back in her chair. He always thought I built an empire to hand it to him. He never understood. I built it to prove I didn't need anyone to hand it to me. Ben finished drafting and slid the documents across the table. Once you sign here and here, the restructure will take effect. Grant's name will be purged from every holding within 24 hours. Elena's provisional notice will be filed with the fiduciary board. Joanne took the pen. Her signature flowed in perfect script, steady and final. Make sure the notice reaches him, she said. Quietly. Ruth arched a brow. You want him to know? I want him to realize, Joanne said. There's a difference. Ben added his countersignature. Done. The assets are secure, and the inheritance is protected under private guardianship. Ruth grinned. And the in-laws? Flagged, Ben said simply. No access, no appeals. Joanne stood, smoothing her blazer. Send the confirmation to my office, paper copy only. When she turned toward the door, Ben hesitated. Joanne, he said quietly, I've worked with you a long time. You've always built things. Companies, reputations, empires. But this, he gestured toward the signed papers. This feels like demolition. Joanne looked back at him, eyes calm, almost kind. Demolition clears the view, Ben. Sometimes the only way to see what's next is to remove what blocks the light. She left before he could answer. Outside, Ruth fell into step beside her under the awning. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets shining like polished stone. So, Miss Whitaker, Ruth said lightly, how does it feel, knowing every dollar, every deed, every future check has just skipped a generation? Joanne gave a faint smile. Cleaner than forgiveness. They reached her car, a black sedan idling under the portico. Joanne opened the door, then paused, glancing at Ruth. You were right. About what? Replacing them feels better than erasing them. Ruth's grin was slow and satisfied. Told you. As Joanne slid into the back seat, her phone buzzed. A single email notification flashed across the screen. From Ben Crowley. Subject, confirmation, Whitaker Trust Amendment filed attachment, beneficiary transfer, Elena Ramos, Ruth Delgado's niece. Below it, one more notification appeared, a forwarded email chain. From Grant Whitaker to Whitaker Legal Holdings. Subject, urgent, account access error. The message preview read only 2 words. What happened? Joanne stared at it for a moment, then swiped it away. She looked out the window as the car pulled into traffic, her reflection gliding over the city she owned piece by piece. He never understood, she murmured. The trust was never his to lose. The rain had dried by morning, leaving the air crisp and impossibly clear. Joanne Whitaker sat by her living room window, sunlight spilling over stacks of manila folders, legal notices, and a single shoebox she hadn't opened in years. The lid read, Grant, ages 5 to 21, written in her neat, unfaltering hand. She didn't open it for nostalgia. She opened it for inventory. Inside were fragments of a childhood that now felt like someone else's investment portfolio. Construction paper cards, clumsy handwriting, forgotten promises. The first read, Happy birthday, Mom, you're the best. In crayon, smudged fingerprints in the corners. The next from middle school was terser. Thanks for everything. Love, G. By college, the messages had turned purely logistical. Transferred tuition, thanks again. She flipped through them slowly, one by one, the handwriting evolving as the sentiment decayed. When she reached the last one, a store-bought card signed only with Grant Whitaker in rushed black ink, she let out a soft breath, almost a laugh. Ruth appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. "I found those while I was digging through the attic." "You sure you want to go down that memory lane?" "It's not memory," Joanne said. "It's evidence." Ruth set the mugs down, lowering herself onto the couch beside her. "He's always been charming to the wrong people. Learned early that affection was a currency." Joanne closed the box. "I was his backbone. He wanted a blank check." Ruth tilted her head. "You gave him both." Joanne didn't deny it. "Not anymore." The phone on the table buzzed. Not Ben, not a bank. This time it was a text from one of the city's charity coordinators. "Quick heads up. Hearing strange talk from the Carsons. Something about you stealing the spotlight?" Ruth rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go." It didn't take long for the rumors to find traction. Within 48 hours, Aubrey Carson Whitaker's carefully curated social circle had turned into a whisper mill. At luncheons, she was sharing her side. At the salon, she was finally speaking her truth. At a gala meeting, she told anyone who would listen that Joanne had sabotaged the wedding out of jealousy, controlling tendencies, even psychological instability. The stories changed depending on the audience, but the punchline stayed the same. The mother was a monster. Joanne didn't flinch when she heard. She'd built her life on weathering men who underestimated her. What was one petty bride compared to that? Still, she acted. By Thursday afternoon, she was seated in the boardroom of the Dallas Women's Philanthropy Council, a small smile on her face, an organized folder on the table before her. "Thank you all for meeting on such short notice," she began, voice steady and professional. "I'm aware there's been chatter regarding the wedding, my son, and my involvement. I find that transparency clears the air faster than gossip." The room fell silent as she opened the folder. Inside were itemized ledgers, vendor contracts, email threads, all time-stamped, signed, and indisputable. "Every transaction, every cost," she said. "All paid by my accounts. Every donation under my foundation's name remains intact and audited. No impropriety, no scandal, just a mother funding a celebration she thought was for family." She slid copies toward each board member. "If anyone wishes to verify, Crowley Financial can provide third-party confirmation." The women exchanged looks, some sympathetic, some impressed, a few guilty for ever having believed otherwise. When Joanne finished, she leaned back in her chair. "That's all I have to say on the matter. But since transparency is our theme, Aubrey's family still owes the club for floral overages and catering overages totaling $19,000. I've decided to donate that amount in her name, to the shelter she never once attended a meeting for." The head of the board, a dignified woman named Meredith Boyd, folded her hands. "Joanne, no one here doubts your integrity. You've been the spine of this community for years." Joanne smiled thinly. Spines are good for balance. When the meeting adjourned, Ruth was waiting in the hall, leaning against the marble pillar, smirking. "Let me guess. They called you brave." "Predictably." "And how's our newly unemployed socialite?" "Trying to rewrite the narrative," Joanne said. "But the facts are louder." They stepped into the afternoon sunlight. The Dallas skyline gleamed, crisp and glassy after the storm. Joanne tucked her sunglasses on, the faintest breeze lifting her hair. "Regret any of it yet?" Ruth asked. Joanne paused, considering. "Regret requires doubt. I don't have any left." They reached the car. A valet opened the door, eyes wide, the kind of deference reserved for women whose names carried weight. Before getting in, Joanne glanced back toward the city, toward the glittering towers where whispers were already curdling into silence. "Rumors fade," she said softly. "Receipts last forever." The ballroom of the Crescent Hotel glimmered under crystal chandeliers, the kind of old Dallas elegance that whispered wealth instead of flaunting it. The annual Hearts and Horizons charity dinner had begun, and Joanne Whitaker, immaculate in navy satin, sat exactly where she belonged, at the head table. Her chair was flanked by board members, sponsors, and the kind of people who measured success in influence, not applause. To her right, Ruth Delgado swirled a glass of champagne with practiced indifference, her black dress a deliberate contrast to the room's gold tones. "Nice turnout," Ruth murmured. "Charity's always fashionable when reputations need polishing," Joanne replied lightly. They exchanged a small, knowing smile, the kind shared by generals before a battle they'd already won. Across the ballroom, camera flashes flickered as late arrivals entered. The hum of conversation dimmed for just a heartbeat as the double doors opened. Grant and Aubrey Whitaker stepped inside. Aubrey's gown was blush pink, delicate, designed for sympathy. Grant looked forced into his tuxedo, the crisp lines unable to disguise the exhaustion etched around his eyes. Their entrance, once expected to command admiration, now only drew glances heavy with curiosity and quiet judgment. Ruth saw them first. "Oh, this'll be good," she said under her breath. Joanne didn't turn. She didn't need to. The temperature in the room had shifted. She could feel it in the way conversation stuttered, then recalibrated. The maitre d' escorted the couple to table 14, near the back. A polite distance. Not exile, but not inclusion, either. When the waiter moved to pour wine, Ruth leaned toward him. "Skip that table?" she said casually. The young man blinked. "Ma'am?" Ruth smiled, kind but sharp. "Table 14. They didn't pay their donation this quarter. No wine for unpaid guests." The server hesitated, then nodded, understanding more than she said. "Of course, ma'am." Ruth sipped her own champagne, satisfied. Some messages travel faster when delivered politely. At the head table, Joanne listened to the keynote speaker discuss community leadership, her expression serene, her attention seemingly fixed forward. But in her periphery, she saw it all. Aubrey's tight smile, Grant's restless shifting, the subtle gap forming around them as nearby guests angled their chairs elsewhere. Dallas society didn't need announcements. It needed cues. And Joanne had set them perfectly. After the applause, the crowd broke into low chatter. Aubrey rose from her seat, clutching her clutch like armor. Her heels clicked decisively across the marble floor toward the head table. Ruth noticed first. "Incoming," she said. Joanne didn't turn. She adjusted her napkin instead, unfolding it neatly across her lap. "Mrs. Whitaker?" Aubrey's voice wavered just slightly, sugar melting at the edges. "Can we talk?" Every head at the table turned just enough to catch the moment, like sharks circling a ripple. Joanne finally looked up. Her expression was calm, eyes steady, voice even. "You're interrupting the program?" Aubrey swallowed. "I just wanted to clear the air. Things have gotten out of hand." "Things," Joanne repeated, the word tasting clinical. "Grant and I, you and Grant," Joanne said smoothly, "are learning what consequence feels like. It's inconvenient, but character building." The murmurs around them sharpened into silence. Aubrey's mouth opened, then closed again. Color flushed her face as she realized Joanne wasn't angry. She was uninterested. Joanne turned slightly to Ruth. "What's next on the program?" Ruth checked the printed itinerary as though the interruption hadn't happened. "Auction items. The Whitaker Foundation's donation closes the set." "Perfect." Joanne's attention returned to her glass. Aubrey stood frozen for a beat too long before retreating, head bowed, heels echoing her retreat. Grant reached for her as she sat down, but she pulled away, eyes glistening. Across the room, whispered commentary rippled like a current. "Did you see that?" She didn't even acknowledge them. "Well, after what they did?" No one had to finish the sentence. In Dallas, silence was the sharpest condemnation. Ruth leaned toward Joanne, tone dry. "You're trending in real time. Dallas mother outsmarts scandal. You'll hit the news circuit by morning." Joanne's smile was subtle, almost wistful. "Then I suppose the truth found its audience." She lifted her glass, glancing toward the charity's banner, a soft pink heart encircled by golden lettering. "For the cause," she murmured. Ruth clinked her glass against hers. "For the closure." The room's energy swelled again, music rising, laughter reborn, but table 14 remained untouched, a quiet island of humiliation. Aubrey stared into her empty glass. Grant's shoulders slumped. Across the room, Joanne's calm profile caught the light. Composed, unreachable, absolute. She didn't look back once. The dinner should have ended quietly, with applause and polite laughter echoing beneath the chandeliers. But Dallas nights have a way of curdling when pride meets humiliation, and pride was the only currency Grant and Aubrey had left. The auction was winding down. Joanne's name had just been announced from the stage as the evening's top donor. The audience clapped, camera flashes stuttered across the ballroom. She acknowledged them with a composed nod, her diamond earrings catching the light. Then the sound cut through it all. High, sharp, raw. "She's ruining our lives." Aubrey Carson Whitaker stood near table 14, her voice ricocheting across the marble like a breaking glass. Heads turned instantly. The MC froze mid-sentence. The pianist faltered, fingers slipping from the keys. Grant tried to pull her arm down. "Aubrey, stop." But she wrenched free, mascara streaking. "No, I'm done pretending. Everyone here thinks she's some saint. She's not. She's vindictive, controlling. She destroyed us." The crowd's discomfort thickened. Conversations died mid-whisper. Every guest at the surrounding tables had gone perfectly still, except Ruth Delgado, who calmly adjusted her champagne flute and said under her breath, "And there it is." Joanne didn't move. Her hands stayed folded, expression serene, like a woman observing weather she'd already predicted. Aubrey's tirade rolled on. "She took everything. Our accounts, our house, our photos. She's turned everyone against us. You all worship her, but she's nothing without control." Grant finally grabbed her shoulders. "Enough." His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through the last of his composure. "Aubrey, please, just sit down." She shoved him away. "You said she wouldn't win." The ballroom doors opened, and two members of the hotel's discreetly dressed security staff stepped in, alerted by the staff's silent radio call. Their presence was polite, but unmistakable. Grant turned to them, voice low and pleading. "We're fine, please. She's just upset. We'll leave quietly." But Aubrey wasn't finished. "Leave," she barked. "No, let them see what she did." She pointed toward Joanne's table, finger trembling. "You want to talk about Grace? Look at her. Sitting there like a—" "Mrs. Whitaker." The charity chairwoman interjected from the stage, her voice trembling with forced diplomacy. "Perhaps we should, take a short intermission?" Joanne finally stood. Her movements were slow, deliberate, elegant. The room instinctively parted for her as she crossed the space between them. The air hummed with tension so tight it could have snapped a chandelier chain. When she stopped, she was 2 feet from Aubrey. Close enough for the girl to see the calm in her eyes and the warning behind it. Joanne spoke quietly, but the silence made her words carry. "You've mistaken consequences for cruelty, my dear. They're not the same." Aubrey's breath hitched. "You think you can erase us?" "I haven't erased you," Joanne said. "I've simply stopped underwriting you." Gasps fluttered through the crowd like a breeze through silk. Ruth smiled faintly into her drink. Security moved forward. Grant lifted his hands, a final attempt at damage control. "Please, we'll go. Just Let's not make it worse. Aubrey's sobs had turned ragged now, the sound of a mask splitting down the center. One guard gently guided her toward the exit, the other stood between Grant and the crowd. He turned once, toward his mother. His voice broke. You didn't have to do this here. Joanne met his gaze evenly. You chose the stage. I just stayed on it longer. Ruth exhaled, low and satisfied. Well, she murmured as security led them toward the doors. That was cathartic. Around them, murmurs rippled again, sympathetic for Joanne, scandalized for them. Someone started clapping, then another. It spread in hesitant bursts until the sound filled the room. An applause of loyalty, not pity. The charity chairwoman approached, her pearls trembling slightly as she spoke. Mrs. Whitaker, on behalf of the board, thank you for handling that with such grace. Joanne inclined her head. Grace is easy when you've already stopped caring. Ruth chuckled softly. You're getting quotable in your old age. Joanne's eyes followed the departing couple as the ballroom doors closed behind them. It wasn't revenge, she said quietly. It was return. Ruth tilted her head. Return of what? Balance, Joanne replied. Respect. Ownership of my own story. The music resumed, hesitant at first, then swelling as laughter slowly reclaimed the room. The scandal had been contained, boxed neatly into a moral for those who cared to learn. Joanne returned to her seat, the applause fading to murmurs of admiration. Ruth poured her another glass of champagne. Do you think they'll recover? Ruth asked. Joanne smiled faintly. They'll survive. That's punishment enough. As she raised her glass, the ballroom lights dimmed for the final announcement. The MC's voice echoed, smooth but strained. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take one more round of applause for our presenting sponsor, Mrs. Joanne Whitaker. The crowd obliged. She accepted it without pride, only calm. The morning after the gala dawned soft and gold, the kind of sunlight that tried to pretend the night before hadn't happened. But Dallas remembered everything, and so did Joanne Whitaker. Her phone lay face down beside a half-empty cup of coffee, vibrating once, then again. The vibration didn't stop until the porcelain rattled against the table. From Grant Whitaker. Subject: Mom, please. She stared at the screen without touching it. The preview showed only the first few words. You've made your point. We can fix this if... Joanne swiped left. Delete. No hesitation, no curiosity. The sound of the digital deletion, soft, final, felt cleaner than forgiveness. Across the table, Ruth Delgado sat cross-legged, scrolling her tablet. She didn't look up when she said, That him? Joanne nodded. The last message, I imagine. Ruth lowered the screen, studying her friend's face. You sure you don't want to leave the door cracked? Just a sliver? Joanne stirred her coffee, the spoon clicking softly against the ceramic. He slammed it. I just reinforced the lock. Ruth smiled wryly. That's poetic. It's practical. The house was silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the slow rhythm of two women who had already outlasted sentiment. Ben Crowley arrived just after noon. He was precise, as always. Pressed suit, umbrella under his arm despite the blue sky. He laid a thick folder on the table, each page tabbed and color-coded. Everything's finalized, he said. The estate is now fully restructured under the Whitaker Charitable Trust. Beneficiaries are limited to foundation programs and the 3 named subgrants you specified. Joanne nodded, flipping through the documents. No loopholes? None, Ben said. I've double-checked the protections myself. Grant has been formally and permanently removed from all claims. Even probate can't touch this. Good, Joanne murmured. He hesitated before continuing. There's one more thing. His lawyer reached out. Apparently, Grant's asked for mediation. She didn't look up. Decline. He seemed sincere, Ben said carefully. Desperate even. I've already mediated, she said. In public. He preferred the audience then. Ruth leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. I swear, Joanne, you're becoming the patron saint of closure. Joanne's lips curved faintly. No sainthood. Just efficiency. Ben smiled faintly, closing the folder. Then this is the final step. You're free of him. Entirely. Free. Joanne repeated softly. The word felt strange, both weightless and heavy. After Ben left, the house felt even quieter than before. Ruth wandered into the kitchen, rummaging for more coffee while Joanne stood by the window, her gaze drifting to the backyard garden. A wind stirred the magnolia leaves. The air carried the smell of honeysuckle and rain. For the first time in weeks, Joanne felt something shift. Not peace exactly, but space. She walked to her study, opened her laptop, and pulled up her foundation's donation portal. Her cursor hovered briefly, then clicked on the account labeled South Dallas Women's Renewal Shelter. A few keystrokes later, the confirmation window blinked open. Donation submitted, $50,000. Anonymous gift. She didn't add a note. She didn't need to. That afternoon, she drove to the shelter. No chauffeur, no fanfare. The small brick building sat nestled between a church and a daycare, its sign freshly painted, its parking lot cracked but swept clean. Inside, the director greeted her warmly. Mrs. Whitaker, what an honor. We didn't expect you in person. Joanne smiled. I like to see where things begin. The director led her through the halls, small bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled faintly of cinnamon and bleach, a playroom filled with mismatched toys. In one corner sat a young woman, no older than 22, holding a baby against her chest while filling out forms. When she looked up, Joanne froze for a moment. The girl's eyes, green, steady, a little wary, were almost familiar. The director smiled. That's Claire. Just arrived last week. She's got a lot of fight in her. Joanne approached quietly. First week's always the hardest. The girl blinked, surprised by the attention. You've been here before? Not this place, Joanne said. But I've been where you are, trying to rebuild something everyone thought was already finished. Claire looked down at her baby, then back up. It gets better? Joanne smiled gently. If you do the work, yes, it always does. They spoke for a few minutes, nothing heavy, nothing confessional. When Joanne left, Claire thanked her with quiet sincerity, the kind that wasn't trying to please anyone. Outside, the late afternoon sun hit the windshield just right, and for the first time in months, Joanne didn't flinch at her reflection. Ruth called as she drove. So, you went? Yes. You feel better? Joanne paused, watching a traffic light change from red to green. I feel corrected. Meaning? Meaning, she said, that sometimes the only way to balance a ledger isn't to collect, but to give. Ruth laughed softly. You realize that's the closest thing to sentiment you've said in 20 years. Don't get used to it. They hung up. When Joanne reached home, the house was dim, peaceful. She set her purse down, poured a single glass of wine, and sat by the window as dusk bled into the skyline. Her phone buzzed once more. Another message. No subject line this time. Just a preview. You'll regret this. She didn't open it. She didn't even swipe. Instead, she silenced the phone, turned it face down, and watched the lights of Dallas flicker on, each one a little promise that the city would move on, and so would she. The envelope arrived 3 days later, cream-colored and heavy, the kind of stationery chosen by people who still believed presentation could disguise intent. Joanne found it tucked among bills and charity newsletters, her name written in Grant's handwriting, once boyish, now desperate. She didn't open it. Not yet. She carried it inside, placed it on the kitchen counter beside a cooling pot of coffee, and stood staring at it as if it were a living thing. Ruth arrived 15 minutes later, as she often did, armed with pastries and a radar for emotional weather. She took one look at the envelope and sighed. Well, that's either a confession or a trap. Joanne didn't respond. She sat at the table, sliding a finger along the edge of the seal but not breaking it. He still writes like he's 12. The W always dips lower than the rest. Ruth leaned on the counter. Want me to read it? No. Want me to burn it? Not yet. The clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Joanne finally picked it up, weighing it in her hand. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like weight. She turned it over. The return address was printed in Aubrey's delicate cursive. Beneath it, the words, "For the sake of the family." Joanne exhaled softly, a sound halfway between amusement and exhaustion. There it is. The moral appeal. Ruth's brow arched. You'd think they'd retire that phrase after weaponizing it for 20 years. Joanne set the envelope on the table, slid it open with the edge of a butter knife, and withdrew the folded letter. She unfolded it only halfway, just enough to glimpse the first line. Mom, I know we've both made mistakes. That was enough. She folded it back with the precision of someone closing a file rather than discarding one. She slipped it back into the envelope without reading another word. Ruth watched her. You really don't want to know what it says? Joanne shook her head. I already know what it says. It's the same speech, just printed instead of performed. Then what do you want me to do with it? Joanne pushed the envelope across the table. No stamp, she said. Ruth tilted her head. Making a point? Returning one, Joanne replied. Ruth smirked, reaching for a sticky note from the side drawer. She scribbled something quickly, folded it in half, and tucked it under the unsealed flap before pressing it closed. Joanne glanced at her. What did you write? Ruth met her eyes, deadpan. Return to sender. Joanne allowed herself a small laugh. The first genuine one in weeks. Fitting. They left it at that. No debate, no drama. Just a simple understanding between two women who had learned that closure sometimes came in the form of unmailed truth. Later that afternoon, Joanne drove to the post office herself. The sky was a pale, forgiving blue, streaked with wisps of white that looked like brush strokes. She parked, carried the envelope inside, and stood in line behind a woman mailing birthday invitations. The child tugged at her mother's sleeve, babbling about balloons. When it was Joanne's turn, the clerk smiled politely. Mailing today? Joanne placed the envelope on the counter, her voice calm. No. Returning. The clerk glanced at the missing stamp. You sure you don't want it delivered? I'm sure. She dropped it in the outgoing slot herself, watching it disappear into the metal chute with a soft clatter. That sound, small, final, echoed louder in her chest than she expected. On the drive home, she didn't turn on the radio. Dallas slid past her window, sun-drenched and indifferent, a city moving on without permission or apology. When she pulled into her driveway, the magnolias were swaying again, the same slow rhythm as before. She walked up the path, heels crunching faintly over gravel, and paused at her front porch. For months, this space had felt heavy, guarded, haunted by the echo of an ungrateful son. Now it was still, peaceful. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let the silence settle around her like a soft shawl. From the kitchen, Ruth's voice called, Did you mail it? Returned it, Joanne corrected. Ruth appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand. And? Joanne looked toward the window where the late light was cutting across the floor in clean, golden stripes. And now it's not my move anymore. Ruth smiled faintly. That's as close to peace as you're ever going to admit to. Probably. They shared a quiet moment, the kind that only exists between people who have already said everything that needs saying. Outside, a breeze passed through the trees, scattering a few petals onto the porch. Joanne watched them fall, weightless, unbothered. The package arrived without fanfare. No courier, no signature required, just a small brown box sitting neatly on Joanne Whitaker's front porch like a misplaced thought. There was no return address, only her name written in looping script across the top. She brought it inside, setting it on her kitchen counter. The air was still, save for the rhythmic tick of the wall clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. It felt too quiet for what the last few months had been, a silence that no longer accused, just observed. Ruth arrived 20 minutes later, as she often did, uninvited but expected. "What's this?" she asked, nodding toward the box while hanging her jacket on the chair. "No idea," Joanne said. "Probably another fundraiser or a thank you gift." Ruth grinned. "Well, open it. Maybe it's a plaque saying most composed woman in Texas." Joanne took a small knife from the drawer, sliced through the tape, and lifted the flaps. Inside, wrapped in simple white tissue, was a framed photograph. She froze. It was her, at the wedding. The moment just before she stood, before everything turned. Her posture straight, her expression unreadable, the champagne glass glinting like a weapon disguised as elegance. Around her, the guests were mid-laughter, oblivious to what was about to unfold. Pinned to the corner of the frame was a note, handwritten in neat, professional cursive. "I've never seen someone own a room so gently. Callie Green, the wedding coordinator." Ruth leaned closer, whistling low. "Well, that's poetic justice. She sent you the world's most polite battle trophy." Joanne traced the edge of the frame with one finger. The photograph wasn't triumphant. It wasn't even angry. It was calm, unapologetically calm. It captured the exact second before she'd rewritten her story. "Where are you going to put it?" Ruth asked. Joanne didn't answer right away. She carried the frame down the hall, past the living room and into her office, a room lined with books, awards, and quiet power. The morning light filtered through sheer curtains, washing everything in muted gold. She stood by the wall opposite her desk, where a space had sat empty since the day she took down Grant's law school portrait. Without ceremony, she lifted the photograph and hung it in its place. The nail fit perfectly. Stepping back, she regarded it in silence. It wasn't vanity, not nostalgia either. It was record, evidence of the moment she stopped apologizing for the boundaries she'd always been told to loosen. Ruth lingered in the doorway, arms crossed. "You ever notice that's the only picture anyone ever took of you standing up at that wedding?" Joanne smiled faintly. "Fitting, isn't it?" Ruth nodded toward the image. "What do you see when you look at it?" Joanne tilted her head slightly. The sunlight hit the glass, scattering faint prisms across the wall. "Proof." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "Proof that you were right?" Joanne's gaze didn't waver. "Proof that I was never wrong." For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Outside, a wind rustled through the magnolias. The house, the same house that had once echoed with Grant's laughter, then his absence, felt steady again. Ruth poured them each a small glass of wine from the bottle on the credenza. "So, what happens now?" Joanne took her glass. "Now?" She looked around the room, her eyes lingering on the photograph. "Now I get back to work. The world's still spinning, and I've spent too long watching it instead of steering it." Ruth clinked her glass lightly against hers. "To steering." Joanne smiled. "To silence that means peace, not punishment." They drank quietly, the kind of shared toast that required no words to explain its weight. As the afternoon deepened, Ruth gathered her things. "You know," she said, pausing at the door, "if this were a movie, this would be the part where he shows up, begging for forgiveness." Joanne's smile was subtle, knowing. Then it's a good thing this isn't a movie. When Ruth left, the house fell quiet again. Joanne remained in her office, gazing at the photograph. Outside, the light shifted, turning the reflection into something softer, almost kind. She spoke softly, to no one. At his wedding, my son said, "I always hated my mother." Her reflection in the glass looked back at her, older, steadier, unbothered. "So I stood up," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "and let him see who paid for it." She smiled once, faintly, then turned off the light. At his wedding, my son said, "I always hated my mother. So I stood up and let him see who paid for it."